Hey, Sun Devils, this is Mr. Moore, and I'm here with your Week 9 notes. And as a reminder to every student in my class, there really aren't any notes for Week 10 because Week 10 is going to be our first quarter final, and I'm not going to be teaching you new material the week we take a test. So this is really going to end the first half of our government class. In this first half of the government class, we have been covering a lot of things like the Constitution of the United States. We've been pulling ideas out of the Declaration of Independence. We've been talking about the three branches of government and what they're called in our country, how they function, what they do, what they're supposed to do, the powers that they have. And of course, we're kind of wrapping up this first quarter of the government class with the Bill of Rights. Last week, I talked about the first four amendments, and I'd just like to review those. The First Amendment grants us a lot of different freedoms, like the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble peaceably and to petition our government for grievances. The Second Amendment is that right to bear arms, to protect yourself, to be able to have firearms, to protect your property and your persons and your family. The third one is the one that's the least used, but it still sets up the idea of other rights that we believe in, like the right to private property. It had to do with the Quartering Act, right, where the military couldn't come in and use your home without your permission, kind of a thing. So it lays down the foundation for things we still use today. And of course, the Fourth Amendment is that right of search and seizure, where the government can't just come in and search your person or your property or effects without probable cause, right? Without the legal ramifications of getting a warrant. Well, this week we're going to cover the rest of the Bill of Rights. Last week we also did an overview of the all of the amendments, the 27 amendments. We didn't go over all of them, but kind of touching on some of the other big ones that really affect you as a student, as a person. This week we are focusing on personal liberties, which is the Bill of Rights, and the challenges of democracy. And when we're done, we want to know, how can you protect your rights? And what can you do to fully participate in the political processes of our nation? If you ignore your rights, they'll go away. Next quarter, we're going to focus on some political parties. And, some people see themselves as Republicans, and some people see themselves as Democrats, and some people are just sick of the two main political parties in our country. They know that if you elect a clown, you should expect a circus. And some people feel like maybe there isn't real differences in the political parties. There's just corporate business that kind of runs the world. Because no matter which political party you're in, you're going to get funding from different companies and corporations. So maybe they're the ones who are really running the show. But those are the kind of things we're going to focus on a lot next quarter. But please understand that's one of the things we're going to do. Right now, we're going to focus on the rest of the amendments. So picking it up with the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on the presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, or be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff to cover. First off, if you're in the military and you commit a crime, you're in a whole different system. So when it says right here, everybody has the right to a jury. Okay, we're going to talk about jury in the next amendment, maybe a little bit more. But if you're in the armed forces, you fall under different legalities and jurisdiction. So that's really interesting to focus on. When I look at the Fifth Amendment, I think it kind of boils down to three basic things. And the first one is probably the most famous because maybe you've heard somebody say, I plead the Fifth. And what they mean by that is they have the right to remain silent. Um, because some people don't pay attention in their high school government class, they forget their rights. There was a famous court case that happened in the Supreme Court where the person who was the person with the last name of Miranda was saying that they kind of incriminated themselves. When the police arrested this person, they basically said that they gave more information than they wished they would have before they had legal counsel. So you've probably seen in the cop shows where somebody says you have the police officers arresting somebody and they say you have the right to remain silent. They're giving you a brief reminder of your Fifth Amendment right. You have the right to not answer questions until you have legal counsel. If the police push you and start yelling at you and you feel intimidated and you start talking, well, you gave them permission. So it's okay to not answer any questions until you have legal counsel. The right to remain silent. So you shall not be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against yourself. That's the idea of the right to remain silent, okay? There's also something called double jeopardy, where you do the crime, you pay the time once, not twice. So if somebody goes out and robs a bank and they're taken to court and found guilty and they serve, 5-10 years in prison, and then they get out, the police cannot rearrest them for that bank robbery a second time. They already were tried, they already did the time. I had some students in class one time ask me, so if I rob a bank and I go to jail and I serve time, then I get out and I rob a bank again, they can't arrest me again? No, they can. If you rob a second bank, then they could arrest you for that second crime. But it's what happens is if you do your time, you pay the price, you don't have to do it twice. I remember there was a movie a couple years back called Double Jeopardy, where this woman, her husband fakes his own death and makes it look like she is the one who killed him. And so she gets arrested and thrown into prison. And when she's in prison, she starts to study the law and she finds out about this double jeopardy. And she also finds out that her husband is really still alive. And so when she gets out of prison, she goes and she really kills her husband, and she can't go to jail a second time for killing her husband a second time. Like, she already did the time. Anyways, that's kind of a sick and twisted way to look at it, but that's kind of the idea, that you can't be held accountable twice for the same crime. If you keep committing the same crime, like, you rob a convenience store and then you go to jail, and you come back and you rob a different convenience store, then you could certainly go to jail for that. Okay. The other one is probably one of the most important concepts in the world as far as law goes. It's the idea of due process, the idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, and that if the government wants to hold you accountable for breaking the law, they have the burden of proof. You're innocent until they prove that you're guilty. So that's kind of a shakedown. Sometimes people call this the rights of the accused. Why does denial of human rights so often accompany a violent change of government? I kind of put that question on here to get us to think about what rights we have. The Declaration of Independence tells us that if the government doesn't protect our rights, it's the rights of the people, the governed, to replace the government and replace it with a government that will protect rights. And these are some of the fundamental rights you have. Okay. Is a law just, and what should we be held accountable for? Those are questions that are being asked all the time. If you ever find yourself in court up here in the high desert of California, or if you're asked to serve on a jury, so either way, either you're in trouble with the law or you've never had trouble with the law, but you're 18 years old and you're called to serve on a jury. While I'm recording this, I'm going to have to serve on a jury. I just got a jury summons, and I've been talking to my class about jury summons. So if you ever find yourself in court, you have to serve on a jury, or if you're arrested or accused of something, it will most likely be at the local San Bernardino County Courthouse in Victorville. If you guys are familiar with the Costco that's up here in the high desert, it's just across the freeway from the Costco. So it's close to the Costco, but it's across the freeway. Over there, there's a Home Depot and an In-N-Out, and if you're familiar with the area, that general area right across the freeway from the Costco, that's the local Superior Court of California in the county of San Bernardino, in Victorville. That's probably where you'd end up. The Sixth Amendment is the rest of that phrase that police officers are famous for saying in the cop shows. If the police officer arrests somebody and reads them their Miranda rights, they'll say something to the effect of, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can be used against you in a court of law." That's the Fifth Amendment. But then they continue. They say, "You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you." That's kind of a reminder of the Sixth Amendment. I'm going to go ahead and read the actual Sixth Amendment right here. "In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory processes for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense." So I've kind of broken this down into three simple things. The government can't hold you without a fair and speedy trial. In other words, if the government arrests you, they have to accuse you of something. If they don't actually accuse you of something, they don't have the right to hold you. Okay? So you have to know why you've been arrested. Okay? And if you cannot afford legal counsel, if you can't afford a lawyer, then the government will provide one for you, somebody who's been trained in the law, because there's a lot of exceptions. If anybody asks a law question, the answer is almost inevitably, it depends. Okay? And when you're put on trial in a criminal court case, you have the right to a jury. That is regular people from all walks of life. And they get to serve on a jury, and it's regular people who get to listen to the evidence, and they get to deliberate and discuss and talk. And they're the ones who decide if you're innocent or guilty, depending on how the evidence is presented. And it comes down also sometimes how good the lawyers are, and their defense and their claims and how they use the evidence. But you have the right to a jury. If you were ever accused of a crime and you go to court and you're found guilty, but there's a problem with the jury, like the jury wasn't fair or wasn't selected fairly, then you might be able to appeal your case. So these are really important. These are the rights of the accused. The rights of the accused. Okay, number 7 in our discussion of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Okay, this is the difference between 6 and 7 is the type of court case. Okay, so basically 6 and 7 say something very similar, but this has to do with what we call civil cases, and number 6, of course, is criminal cases. Okay, how do government actions impact civil society? Well, if they're not following due process of law and they're not acting fairly and promptly, then there can be serious issues. So, number 7, let me just explain. Basically, it says jury trials in civil cases. So, criminal cases is when it's the citizen versus the government. Okay? Somebody broke the law. Somebody's going to probably, serve time because you broke the law. A civil case is when it's a citizen versus citizen. Nobody broke the law. Nobody's going to jail, but sometimes we still need a jury. Say if two people have domestic issues and they go through a divorce, that you might be able to settle it in court without a jury, but sometimes when it comes to like a huge estate, you might have to go to court with a jury. But let's read what it says right here, and then we'll discuss the ramifications of the Seventh Amendment. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. The reason I laughed, of course, is because $20. And back when this was written, back in the late 1700s, just after now remember the Constitution was written in 1787, and in 1788 and 1789, there were like the Federalist Papers being written, and people were trying to debate and discuss this new document. Remember, it was 1789 where we get our first president, right, George Washington. But some people didn't want to sign the Constitution as it originally was written because it didn't guarantee personal freedoms. Okay, and so that's one of the thoughts right here is we need to have a Bill of Rights. And so remember, $20 back in the 1700s was a lot more significant than it is today. But nonetheless, civil cases are citizen versus citizen. I've given an example in class before. If my neighbor has a dog and the dog comes over to my yard and chews up my porch furniture, I would probably go to my neighbor first and say, "Hey, dude, your dog, chewed my furniture up, and it cost me $1,000 to buy that porch furniture. I expect you to replace it." Now, if my neighbor's a good neighbor, he might just step up and say, "I'm really sorry about that. Here's the $1,000, or I'll go buy you new porch furniture. I'll fix the problem that my dog caused." If my neighbor doesn't, then I could take my neighbor to court, right? I could sue them. This is like lawsuits, right? And that's what it says right up here, suits, like a lawsuit. So I could sue my neighbor for damages, and I could probably also sue my neighbor for like legal costs because it costs money to go to court. So it wouldn't be just $1,000 if I win. They might be paying me a lot more than that. So sometimes people settle out of court. There are some times where people are brought on a criminal charges, like for instance, one of the most famous ones. Just after I graduated from high school, there was a guy named O.J. Simpson, professional football player, starred in some movies, and there was question that maybe he had killed several people, and it was one of the most sensational court cases that ever happened in the United States. And he was found innocent in criminal case. In the criminal case, they felt like the evidence wasn't sufficient for him to go to jail, and he got off. However, the family sued him in civil court, and he was found guilty. So he didn't go to jail, but was forced to pay money for damages that were caused to the family and such. So hopefully that kind of helps you to understand. There's two different kind of court cases: criminal court cases or civil court cases. The Seventh Amendment says you can have a jury and a fair trial even in civil cases. No rights or no rights. I think that's a deep thought right there. If you don't know your rights, you're not going to have any rights. Okay. Remember, the first 10 amendments are what we call the Bill of Rights. What is the citizen's role in asserting basic rights and protections to all? The Eighth Amendment has to do with, it's going to boil down to bail and punishment. So I'm going to go ahead and read the Eighth Amendment. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So what is bail? Some people misunderstand bail. They think that bail is money to get out of jail, and that's kind of true. Bail is money to get out of jail until your trial. Remember, you're innocent until proven guilty. Now, sometimes the judge will not grant bail. I mean, if you were found with a freezer full of dead bodies or something, and you were arrested and there was like some serious evidence, the judge is not going to grant you bail. No matter how much money you have, they're not going to give you bail. You're going to stay in jail until we prove in court whether you're innocent or guilty. If it's for something smaller, and I'm not saying this is small, but even if, like, say, you were arrested and accused of robbing a liquor store or something like that, they might not need to keep you in jail until they prove you're guilty in court. So you might be able to pay bail. If you can't pay bail, then you got to stay in prison until your trial, and then you are, shown either guilty or innocent. So bail is a tricky thing. It's not like a free get it out of jail just because you have money. It's if you're not, it's not a serious crime, and it's not supposed to be excessive. So if you're like really in danger of fleeing the country, like say you're super rich, bail might be posted really high, like $1 million if you did something really bad. But if you're like a regular person, and they probably wouldn't set bail so high. So the judge does have some leeway, and he has to just kind of prove that there's probable reason to set bail at a certain rate. And again, not everybody can get bail. The other thing is the government cannot torture you in jail. They can't torture you to get evidence out of you. I know all the time in TV shows and in movies, we always see people who are being tortured by the cops or tortured by, the FBI or whatever, or the CIA. That's not supposed to happen. Now, does it really happen? I mean, we have documented evidence of people being tortured while they're in jail. We have evidence of people, even the government, especially people who aren't protected by the Eighth Amendment. Technically, the Bill of Rights only protects American citizens. So when we were fighting over in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and we were doing this whole war on terror, we were capturing some, suspected terrorists of Al Qaeda, and we were bringing them to like prisons that were kind of sort of in the United States, but we didn't want to bring them inside the United States because then maybe the Constitution applies to those places. So we took them to this little military base that we have in Cuba. It's called Guantanamo Bay. And there we have some pretty good documented evidence that, American operatives or military personnel or CIA were using techniques that would be considered torture, like waterboarding, things like that. So there's been some ugly sides to this, but technically the government is not allowed to torture you. They're allowed to lock you up so you're not a danger to the rest of society, but they're not allowed to torture you in jail. That's your Eighth Amendment right. How can citizens improve a democracy? This is Henry David Thoreau. Maybe you've heard of him before. I heartily accept the motto that government is best which governs least. And I should like to see it acted up to more rapidity and systematically carried out. It finally amounts to this, which also I believe, that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. What does he mean? In plain English, he means that if everybody understands how to be civil, if everybody understands their part to play, if everybody understands why we have laws, then the government should not be oppressing us. Regular people will govern themselves. That's really one of the points of this class. Okay? If I can teach you how to be a good citizen and you can understand the law and your rights, then the government we have will function better. The Ninth Amendment is one of the catch-alls. Okay? What are the trade-offs between majority rule and individual rights? Well, the Ninth Amendment is sometimes called the power of the people, or the powers reserved to the people. The rights of the people are not limited to those found in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. The Ninth Amendment, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, we can't list all of your rights. It's not like the Bill of Rights says all of your rights, you know? So if the Constitution doesn't specifically limit people's rights in some regard, um, then they still have those rights. Right? There's so many rights that we could talk about forever. So they're not all listed in the Bill of Rights. And I think that that's the beauty of this Ninth Amendment. It's kind of a catch-all. Unless there's a specific reason for a law, then it shouldn't exist. And there are some laws in the past that were ugly, some laws that had segregation, and some laws that discriminated, and some laws that didn't even allow women to vote, or blacks to be free, or have people to even exercise what they thought was the right thing to do with their conscience. And so this Ninth Amendment is kind of put in there as a catch-all. You should share your opinion if you feel like you have a better one. And if you don't have a better idea, then all you are doing is complaining and not helping the situation. I think that's a great reminder of what public opinion is. There's so many people that go online and they'll really easily say things like, "Oh, that's a stupid idea," or they'll easily bash people or try to slam them online, especially online, because they feel like there's this ambiguity, like it's not real, it's digital, it's virtual. If you have a better idea than somebody, you should speak up. But if you don't have a better idea, then all you're doing is complaining. And people are complaining is easy, and complaining doesn't fix anything. So keep that in mind as you start to participate in government and exercise your rights. The 10th Amendment is the last one in the Bill of Rights. It's not the last amendment. Remember, there's 27 total. The first 10 have their own name, the Bill of Rights. But there are 27 amendments total, and last week I kind of went over some of the other big ones, like the 13th Amendment ending slavery, the 14th Amendment granting citizenship, the 15th Amendment giving voting rights to all males, the 19th Amendment giving voting rights to female women, So there's other really significant amendments outside of the first 10, but the 10th Amendment is kind of like the ninth one. It's kind of a catch-all one, and the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So we kind of call this the powers reserved to the states. If it does not give the power to the federal government in the Constitution, then the states have the power. In other words, there is nothing in the Constitution about education. So who has authority over education and what's to be taught in public schools? The states have that authority, or individual people have that authority. So the federal government can't tell the state of California what's supposed to be taught in California schools. The state government of California gets to choose that. So what's required to graduate from high school is different in California versus Utah versus Texas versus Florida. So if you ever transferred states, you might know this, that the graduation requirements might be different. I went to high school in Utah, and every student was required to take a year of geography. That's not a requirement, education-wise, in California. So I think that's really important to kind of point out. Now, sometimes the federal government gets around that because the federal government knows it can't enforce something, but it does have money. And so sometimes it will say, hey, state of California, if you want federal money for education, then you have to follow these rules or you won't get funding. And the state of California says, boy, we'd really like to get that $50 million, that $100 million from the federal government, so we're going to follow those policies. So the federal government can't force the states what to do in education. but it can encourage them with money. And some states choose not to, like Texas is kind of like one of those wild cards where they'll say, we don't want your money, federal government. Fine, you're not going to give us federal funding. We'll cover it with our own state money. We don't need you to tell us what to do. So that's just a little thought that sometimes the federal government does get around that. What are some of the dangers of a democratic system? Well, if you get a majority of people that believe one thing, you do have the problem of having that minority rights might be trampled on. But theoretically, these 10 amendments are supposed to help all of us feel comfortable um, and know what our rights are so we can exercise those. Again, at the end of each week's notes, I have some review videos. Generally, they're crash course videos, and I'll assign some of them in class. But I like to point some of them out so you understand the personal liberties and the challenges of democracy as we finish talking about your personal rights as granted in the Bill of Rights. Thanks for being here. This is week 9, notes for the government class. Mr. Moore.